Okay, so we are at chapter 18 of Tanya. Until now, we have been talking about how we can generate love and fear of God, or at least love of God, or at least an appreciation and a cognizance of a love, which is what we talked about in chapter 16 and 17, that will motivate action, positive action, through meditation. So the channel is mind, heart, action, which mirrors the verse that in the title page that we looked at last week, which is the reason what the Alter Rebbe is setting out to do in this entire Tanya book, which is from the Bible, from the Torah, Ki karov elecha hadavar me'od. This matter of serving God is very close to you. In your heart and in your mind, you shall do it. Beficha uvilvavcha la'asoto. So he's saying mind, meditate, heart, action. With the action being the main thing. So the point of the matter is to do the action, because the action is what actually affects the world, our time. We can consecrate our time, we can consecrate our space, and each other, nefesh. So those are the three planes: time, space, and people and soul that we can change with our action. Okay, what happens though and yes, we can do this. We were taught in last week's chapter, anybody with a brain in their head can accomplish this. You can just channel the inborn physiology that we're born with to be able to meditate on something, and then that will create some sort of feeling or some sort of appreciation, at least. But what happens if there's a real disconnect, or if somebody doesn't have the knowledge what they don't know, they don't have what to meditate about, they don't have the language, they don't have the thinking points, and especially in previous generations where there wasn't internet and there wasn't and there was a caste system of knowledge, and there were whole groups of people, whole segments of populations that did not have access to information or study. They were kind of stuck. What happens to people like that? Can they not access this love and fear of God if they don't have this ability to know and then therefore meditate on? And even people who do have that ability to meditate, let's say me and you, what happens when we have this like throat constriction? There's like our head, and then there's our heart, and then there's just like this inability to connect. I know I've experienced that. I know, and times of stress, it's really hard to connect. You can be thinking, and it just swirls around in the brain, and it's sometimes even hard to create an appreciation. Sometimes you're just like, I don't even know where I am. Right? Overwhelmed. That's a beautiful example of that's the word. So, what happens then?
Well, we are socialized from birth in our family. We learn things from the mother, from the father, and then the family as you grow up.
So
it's
can you
learning process that you learn.
So maybe
understand what the beliefs of your family.
So maybe you draw upon what you've been brought up with.
Yeah. And everybody's different.
Yes, and actually you're very, very warm to what the Tanya is about to say, literally. But if I could just make it harder, what happens if somebody was not brought up in a functioning home? What if they were not brought up with values that, good values or Torah values or even human, constructive values, right? They're at a huge disadvantage. But does that mean that they don't have a chance? No, you're right. The question is how. What is their chance? So until now, we have been talking about the long, short way. And the Tanya gave us a little intro to it. And then it's going to take a break. And then we're going to come back to the long, short way. And I'm going to explain it in a minute at chapter 26. And that's going to take us till the end of the Tanya. That's the main point. We're going to be focusing on, in the big picture, long, short way is what we're going to be studying. What is the long, short way? We had the story of the little smart aleck boy from Jerusalem who says, well, you can go the long, short way or the short, long way. The long, short way takes you on this roundabout path, which means it will take longer. It's going to be a longer hike, but you get there without any obstacles. And the short, long way is a direct path, but there's terrain. So both ways, there's a long, short way and a short, long way to serving God, to getting to a place where we can be authentically serving God from our heart and our mind all in. How can we get there? We can get there the long, short way, which means it's long because it's hard. Mind, meditation, basically create and generate emotion from our meditation, from study and meditation, we generate. That's called the long, short way because it's long. It's a long process. You need to work at it. It's a life's mission. It's short because it gets you there. If you follow the path, you will get there. And it's also more sustainable because if you are coming to something from your own, it's almost like when you earn money. When you earn money because you worked hard for it versus if you got it as a gift. So if you earn something and you work hard for it, a lot of times it's more sustainable. A lot of times it has more sticking power. That's why it's long, short. We're going to take a break from long, short. Okay? We're going to do like chapters 18 through 25 are going to be short, long way. Why? Because the short, long way is true. It's factually there, and it's important because they complete each other. When the long, short way, well, like we just talked about the drawbacks right in the beginning of this conversation. What happens if you don't have the knowledge? What happens if you weren't brought up in this family that promotes self-discovery and knowledge and searching? And what happens? What happens if you are dysregulated? What happens? What happens then? So we've got the short, long way. And the short, long way is short because it's already here. It's long because doesn't have as much sticking power. But it's short because it's here. And now the rest of this chapter is going to talk about what that means. So we are all born, there's the generating love, but we also have something called ahava misuteret, hidden love, that we're born with. It's in our spiritual DNA. And where do we get it from? What gives us this dormant love? God gives it to us. It's in our souls, our godly soul. We talked about in the beginning in chapter 1, we talked about how there's the animal soul, which is kind of like a human soul. And then there's the godly soul. So the animal human soul we talked about how it's not bad. It's pro-existence. It's pro-ego, me. It also is very rational. And people do a lot of good things with their human soul. What the godly soul gives us is transcendence. It's when we do it not because it's logical or just, or it will help me in the long run, or it's going to be better for my self-growth. That can actually, it's all good stuff, but actually not necessarily godly soul. That could still be part of the human soul domain because human people are rational animals. We're able to reason. We're able to think long term. That's a human quality. So that's not necessarily transcendence. Transcendence is the godly soul's department. It's beyond what makes sense. And that's what we were gifted. And where were we gifted this from? It traces back to our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So let's read a little bit inside in the first page. It says, starting from the middle of the page, starting from the second line. This is hidden love present in the heart of all Jews, which is an inheritance to us from the patriarchs. But I'll continue. Since every Jew already possesses this love as an inheritance, he need not create it through meditation. All that is required of him is that he arouse it and implement it in his observance of the mitzvot. Now I'm going to skip. But we must first preface a clear and precise explanation of the origins of this love and its character, down to the bold. Also, how did this love become our inheritance? All the way to the bottom, the explanation is as follows. The patriarchs were truly the chariot of God. That's where we... Hein ha merkava. Merkava means chariot. So what does it mean to be a chariot? A chariot in modern terms would be a vehicle. They were the vehicle of God. We read their stories in the Torah. We need to remember that they were human beings like us, but they also weren't human beings like us. They were vehicles of God. They were at the level where they had no ego. They were at tzaddik. They didn't have anything in it for themselves. They were vehicles. They were receptacles for whatever God wanted, God's mission. And they were the first to be this. I'm not going to say there's Adam, there's people before them, but they were the first to do this in a way that was also, how am I going to say this? They were the first to establish this. They made it official. Like, this is what we're doing. And Abraham was famous for embodying the attribute of chesed. Isaac was famous for embodying the attribute of gevura. So this brings us back to the Kabbalistic 10 attributes. So there's chesed, the kindness, gevura, the restraint and the discipline. And then Jacob was the combination of the two, the perfect harmony, which is tiferet, beauty or compassion, or basically a perfect blend of chesed and gevura. They embodied those traits, but they embodied them in a way that it wasn't because they thought it was a good idea. They were just full-on vehicles of God, and they integrated this. What they were they integrated God's will into their character. They fused it, kind of in a way that altered their DNA. We talk about epigenetics and how if somebody goes through a trauma, and they can actually pass it down genetically down the line. We all are recipients of this wonderful epigenetic, right? But we're also recipients of epigenetic love, compassion, kindness, radical kindness. It's in our genes. It comes with this and a godly soul. What they did was they fused their experience, their spiritual experience, into their DNA and therefore passed it down the line. And that's why, people who are Jewish are born from a Jewish mother, because it's matrilineal. This DNA line goes down the line through a matrilineal passing down. By the way, there's also something that gets passed down from the patrilineal side. And a lot of times people who are searching for Judaism and they're not born Jewish, if you look back, they have Jewish descent. So even though they're not halachically Jewish, a lot of times the reason why they're being drawn to it, they have a soul that follows a more difficult path home.
So true.
Yeah.
Well, there are so many people in the world who have Jewish ancestors, but because of all the...
Exactly.
They don't even know.
And they don't even know. And a lot of times the people that they have this drive and this voice is spiritual guide inside of them that tells them to keep pursuing Judaism even though they weren't born Jewish. And sometimes it's not because they have any Judaism in the family. That still could mean they have a Jewish soul that needs expression, or it could be part of it, having a Jewish descent.
Now that you mention it, even on this island, I think, Trish, you can think also, lots of people who have got that, I think of Berna, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, so many who've had some Jewish blood somewhere and suddenly it's resurfacing in a need to connect.
Yeah.
So are you saying it's passed on scientifically in DNA or spiritually in a way of being.
What the Tanya is talking about is spiritual DNA. But
That
I
makes much
see
more
correlations.
sense
Yes,
to me.
I do see correlations in and you know when you in our personalities, but it could be our spiritual personality coming through. Definitely, the Tanya is talking about spiritual DNA. It's a soul. The godly soul comes from this inheritance of the forefathers, and if you look back, and historically it matches up. Before the forefathers, there was no such thing as Jews. There were people who were aligned with God, and there were people who were not aligned with God and idol worshippers. Only after the forefathers came in historically and taught monotheism and then did this and each one, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, established further this idea of Judaism, and then it was more officialized with the giving of the Torah, but the Jewish soul started then. That's when it began. And that's, there's also Adam was known, God blew into his nostrils, the first man ever. But the idea of having a soul that can then be passed down to children, that started with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob.
And you're referring to the spiritual.
Spiritual, godly soul. That's where it comes from. It's an inheritance. And coming along with the spiritual, godly soul is this ahava mesuteret, this natural inborn love. Now, this natural inborn love can remain dormant for a very long time. It's there, it's in our nature, and we don't need to run after it, so we can remain complacent about it. And further chapters are going to talk about what this complacency feels like and looks like and manifests as. But today we're going to talk about what happens when it comes alive. So, what happens when it comes alive? We get nuclear. This is a very, very powerful love. And when it's roaring, people do things. Jewish people with godly souls have been known to do things that have shocked themselves. And the biggest example, the most classic example, is giving their lives for Judaism, for God. Now, we can rationalize the idea of giving life for something that we care deeply about. People, Jewish people do not have the copyright over self-sacrifice. People have sacrificed their lives over many different causes, whether it is, a charitable cause or scientific or whatever they care very deeply about or devoted their lives to. Then they don't have that in their life, and then their life becomes not worth living. Let's say. But for Judaism, it's a different thing because historically, whether it's the times of the Crusaders or the Almohads in Spain or the Cossacks or even earlier than that, we've got historical documentation of Jewish people that are not aligned, have not been living, very plugged into the Torah, and all of a sudden they're faced with the sword and they give their lives. And in modern times, we've Daniel Pearl. Daniel Pearl, what did he say right before he died? I'm a Jew. You probably know the quote better than me. I'm a Jew. There was more to it. And he wasn't a practicing, you wouldn't think of him as a practicing Jew during his lifetime. Yet, at the very last moment, what message was important for him to tell the world at his last moments? His Jewish faith. God. What is that? That's the ahava mesuteret unleashed. It's nuclear. It basically is, it's almost like, it's like when the push comes to shove. It's when it occurs when the truth of the matter of our souls gets threatened, then it gets triggered to then show itself. So as long as, and this is foreshadowing the future chapters, which we're touching on the complacency part of it, but as long as this natural dormant love doesn't feel like its existence is being threatened or questioned, it's happy to stay under the surface and allow the human being to operate from whatever calculations and life and whatever's going on. More of a brain, like all the other stuff. It doesn't have to it doesn't feel like its deepest truth is not coming into question. As soon as a Jewish person's deepest truth is called into question, what do you mean? You're telling me that I'm not a Jew? What do you mean? You're telling me that I have to give up my and renounce my Judaism? That's when it's like unleashed. It's like, no, we're not, it will not accept to be outright denied. It won't accept it.
How did the Holocaust, if you're applying this, 6 million people, I know how it happened,
Yeah.
but how did that go down with this principle?
With this principle. Well, the Holocaust was a little different, extremely tragic. A little different in that it wasn't the same as the Crusades, let's say, when they were told, convert or die. They died al-Kiddush Hashem, which means they sacrificed their lives for Judaism because they died because they were Jewish, which means that they died from the ultimate sacrifice. They were not given the choice, though. That's basically it. But even in the gas chambers, we have stories of Jewish people singing, and singing Ani Ma'amin, I believe. We have the famous tune, Ani Ma'amin, which was composed on the train to Treblinka. Ani Ma'amin means I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Mashiach. So this is exactly what's going on with the Jewish people, that even what is the most important to them at their last moments?
I still believe.
I still believe. I'm getting chills as I'm saying that.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
Because that's a question we all ask all the time. Yeah. How did they let it happen? But of course, we also know they had no choice.
Yeah. But despite the fact that they had no choice, we can still see what was triggered at their very last moments. What beauty was triggered.
Belief.
Yeah, belief, and the way many, let's talk about the majority, because we know some sad stories, but the majority of human beings were covering each other, helping each other, supporting each other the most they could during this terrible, terrible time. The spirit was unleashed.
And that's what
and those who survived, let's say Viktor Frankl, talk about the spirit being the thing that propelled them forward. He talks about how there was disease that really wasn't survivable and people survived it. There were things that weren't survivable. 6 million were killed, but even the survivors really survived something unsurvivable. And he talks about, this is if you read the little book, Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about how that's what it was. He credits the meaning, he credits the spirit as being the reason. Yeah.
And we pray that the hostages who are alive, this is the same spirit that's keeping
And they've
them.
been talking about it. There have been hostages that have been sharing. We got to hear some at the Jewish National Retreat. There are some that are speaking, and there are some videos are circulating about how it was the spirit. I think I didn't hear it verbatim, but the jewelry seller, she had 3 names, the hostage. No, I don't remember her name off. It's probably better because I don't want it on the record. But she said that it was the spirit. It was that kept her going while she was a hostage. So we have that in our, unfortunately, very, very recent and right now ongoing, unfortunately. And we pray that our hostages are all released, I want to say by Israel. Let's pray for the best case scenario.
But the spirit ties right into our present.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, the Holocaust question is very
present,
right?
Very.
It's it really gets right down to the depth of the matter when we bring up the Holocaust, because of the intense otherworldly, should have been otherworldly, like nature of it. Which is really, and that's what it does. It gets back. It brings us back to what's really important when we talk about such extreme times, and that's what happens to our soul. At extreme times, it's like, okay, what's really important? And then there's a whole, the chapter goes on to explain a very Kabbalistic mechanism of what is happening and how this occurs, this soul DNA is inside of us and where it comes from. So I'm going to give a little synopsis, but the truth is that I would need to study this more and more and more and more to even, and we're talking about the realm of what is not really understandable. We're talking about a Kabbalistic thing. So we can, maybe try to skim the surface. So, the way that God created the world was with something called Seder Hishtalshalut, which is basically, Hishtalshalut means a chain. So he went from infinity to very, 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 very finite to the point we don't even think about infinity on a day-to-day basis. How did we get from infinity to finity? So through stages. And there's 4 spiritual worlds. There's, I guess is lost. There's Atzilut, which is like, the more you go down, the less spiritual it is. So Atzilut, the most spiritual, Yetzirah, Bria, Asiya. We are in Asiya. So as a soul comes down to this earth, it comes from, it follows the chain, and then it kind of like stops somewhere, and then that's its root on this earth. I'm trying to think of an example, like, like I tell people sometimes, and very tangentially, and I tell people like, oh yeah, no, I stopped at 5th grade. Like, like my mind, like I was growing, I was developing, and then, 5th grade, that's where I'm at now. Like that's what I mean about the souls. Like come down and then they stop. Okay, that's me. And they come down as Chachma of Yetzirah of this, but each soul, each element, like each attribute contains within it other attributes, which is very important because that's how we relate to one another. We all contain elements, spiritual elements of the other elements, and therefore we were all connected. And that's the point of the matter here. The point of talking about this whole chain is to show that we all end up coming from Chachma. Chachma is the first like aspect outside of infinity. And since we all come through this chain, we can all trace back to this first Chachma. Chachma is wisdom. And remember, we talked about in chapter 3, wisdom, Bina, understanding, Da'at, knowledge. Now, Chachma is unique in those 3, and that is it's a flash of inspiration. It's before we've brainstormed and figured out all the details. It's very, very abstract, which is apropos because it's the first element right outside of infinity. So therefore, it is very abstract. And if you take the 2 words, which might be in here, it's called Koach Chachma. Oh, here it is at the very top of the back page.
When you say back,
like the back.
Stapled.
Yes, if your booklet is closed and you turn it upside down. You have to turn it around.
Yeah.
Here.
The last page.
I'm so confused the way it's
You got it.
stapled.
79. Page 79. That's right.
Oh, here. Okay.
So you see, it's like there's bold in the English. Koach ma. Koach ma means the power of what, literally. So that word chachma is 4 letters, can be, there's a play on words that shows, do you not have one?
Oh, that's okay.
No, you're good.
Reading over
Oh,
here.
there's
This one's
another
here.
one.
Here, this is.
Oh,
Oh, thank you. It's okay. I thought you were saying it.
Oh, that's why. That explains it.
The English way.
Yeah. So, so it's the power of what? It's like when we can, the chachma is when we have the wisdom to encounter something true and say, oh wow, I don't understand that. Like whether it's physics does that to me, or like, a lot of the sciences do that. That's one of the reasons why I love science, because it's like, oh wow. And the best professors will tell you, I don't get it. They realize that the depth and the magnitude of what they're studying is so much more than they themselves. That's chachma. And that is that very first attribute right outside of infinity that relates to us. It's that bridge. The what is that infinity? The fact that we are asking, what is that? That's that bridge. And that's where we all trace our souls back to. Through, and who gave us this? Who gave us this soul power? Just want to make sure the recording is still going. Who gave us this soul power? Where did we get this ability to have a soul that comes through this chain? The forefathers. Okay, so we're looping right back. So because we're not talking about the human soul, we're talking all this spiritual DNA that we're talking about is all part of the spiritual, godly, transcendent soul that has been gifted to us through the spiritual epigenetics of the forefathers. Does that make sense? Kind of. It's very, very, very deep, and I don't claim to understand really, really what's up. But why are we talking about this idea of why is it important for us to understand that it comes from Chachma? And the reason is to really understand the power of this Ahava Mesuteret, this hidden love. We need to understand how deeply rooted it is and how it is not dictated by logic. It's supra-rational. It's Chachma, which means it's part of logic, but it's part of the logic that is like, what is that? And the reason why it is, what is that, is because it recognizes and sees truth. So now we're going to talk about the analogy of seeing versus hearing. When you see the truth in something, you don't necessarily understand and cannot necessarily explain to somebody why it is true. A lot of intuitives experience this. You see it. You just see it. And you can't unsee it, but you can't necessarily explain it. That's what the soul feels, that's what the soul's experience is, the Ahava Mesuteret, with God. It has the love, it experiences the love, it sees it, but it can't necessarily explain it. Explaining comes later with Bina. Hearing is compared to understanding. I hear you. I understand you. You hear about something, it means it needs to go through different channels so that you can then explain it, right? So seeing is like, I see it. The picture's worth 1,000 words. You don't have to explain it. I get it. This hidden love that we have is connected and plugged into this seeing truth. It doesn't need to understand it. And therefore, anybody, any Jew with this soul can access it, whether they understand God, whether they've studied Torah or not, whether they've practiced Judaism or not, whether they even know that they have it. Because they have it. The truth of the matter is that they have it. And the soul is just plugged into that truth, whether or not they can explain it. And that loops back into that nuclear experience when it's unleashed, in the case of when people are said convert or die, and they don't even understand why they're choosing death over something they don't understand. Because it's in their DNA. Now, in the future chapters, we are going to talk about harnessing that inborn power to daily life. Because what we're talking about until now is not incongruous with daily life. It's literally the opposite. Daily life is rational brain, and then crazy, hopefully never experience is when this deep, deep power gets unleashed, and then it's beyond logic. But somehow the Alter Rebbe is saying that we can harness this deep, 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 deep inborn love to utilize it as the short, long way. And that concludes this chapter. Any questions before we move on to?
That's a big mouthful.
Big piece to swallow.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting that there's many, many chapters. It's going to get chaptered in the 20s, 20 through 25 is going to get pretty deep into God's philosophy. We're going to be doing philosophy. And there's a reason for Why? Basically, it's very, on one hand, it's like the simplest thing. We're born with it. That's the end of it. But on the other hand, the Alter Rebbe, who's we're talking about, it's all about logically understanding things. So it's going to try to explain this very, 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 very spiritual, you're born with it. What does that actually mean?
And break
philosophically.
it down to small parts.
Yeah, we hope. It's going to be a little bit of philosophy.
Great.
So that's what we're heading into for the next few chapters. 19 is still more like today, and then 20s will be like philosophy, and then we'll go back to the long, short way. So that's a bit of a map of where we're going with all this. Yeah.
Can you just tell me what page 1 is? Being so
Yes.
OCD about
Please take this one.
beginnings and ends.
Here.
Okay, that's the right way.
It's hard. No, yeah, that is the right way. You got it.
Okay. Okay.
It's 3-9 at the bottom, 3 strokes 9.
Okay.
And bottom right is the
So
birthday.
it's like this.
Okay.
This would be 1.
Okay. 1.
Yeah.
Let's meditate on this deep love within us, born within us. Let's all close our eyes. Let's take some deep breaths in through our nose, out through our mouth. Continue to take very deep breaths inside of you and let them exhale out. Ground your feet on the floor. Let's begin to strip the layers and get really deep into who we are. You can visualize yourself with maybe concentric circles and visualize how there are many, many parts of you. And there are parts of you that you put forth outward towards the world, the way you interact with those around you, the way you would like to be seen, the way you show up. Now let's visualize ourselves descending deeper within. We have our emotions, the things we feel deeply about. Let's pay attention to the emotions that are coming up. Allow any emotion that you feel to magnify. Let it be felt. Let yourself feel the emotion in its entirety. And then watch what happens. You might find that the emotion continues to magnify. It might be a pleasant emotion. It might be something like frustration. Maybe after the emotion has magnified, maybe it starts to recede. Maybe you can visualize this emotion fade slightly, pass by, as emotions do. And pay attention to what comes next. Maybe it's another emotion. Maybe you can access a feeling of peace. Maybe you can peer deeply a layer under, to the layer right underneath our emotions. Maybe you can ask yourself, what is at my core? What is non-negotiable for me? If someone were to ask me, who am I? Who am I? What is my truth? Maybe this truth is Ahava Mesuteret, love, hidden love of God that is deeply inside. It is our truth. Maybe you can get curious about what that might feel like. Now, let's turn our journey around and visualize journeying back through the layers of our psyche, but bringing that Ahava Mesuteret, that love, deep identity of love of God with us. So we ascend back through the layers, from the core of ourselves to our emotion, and we bring that natural love of God with us and feel what it feels like when you have that love of God with you as you enter your sphere of emotion. When you feel ready, you can start to poke your head up to the outer layer, the space that sees the world and the world sees it. What does it feel like? Visualize interacting from this space with this hidden love of God, your identity with you. Might I say leading you? When you're ready, open your eyes, your very loving eyes.
I've taken that meditation because it was so good.
Yeah, I actually had that thought as I opened my eyes.
You were like, I could use that.
Listen to the day.
Yeah.
I know. I should do it for myself.
Yeah.
It was really wonderful.
I can't believe you did not prepare for that.
Oh, thank you.
That was crazy.
Absolutely.
It was very deep.
Very. It felt fragile as we came to the outermost exterior to hold on to.
At the end.
Yes, I felt it was very strong when we were at the deepest level.
Oh, yeah.
But to carry it with me
Really hard.
felt very almost like
Well,
a
we didn't do
landing
much
of
of that part.
Space shuttle.
We
I
didn't
thought it
land.
was wobbly,
We
really
did. I did not walk
angular.
you through the landing very well, but also, I will say that this is the drawback of the Ahava Mesuteret.
Keep it with you.
Yes,
day to
that
day
it's a
life.
that is a little bit elusive because it's so deep and so powerful that it's very hard to integrate it.
I felt that you conveyed it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that with the the Alter Rebbe is going to try to show us how to integrate it with chapter 19, 20
So
through
a little
25.
less wobbly re-entry.
Maybe the next meditations will be heavier on the re-entry. Yeah,
No wobbles.
yeah. I like that.
My experience was very interesting from the beginning to the end, but I'm going to start with the coming up. So on the coming up, there was that pause where we sat in the emotion again,
Mm-hmm.
and what was happening in the emotion, in that part of me, was I could see the emotion and I could see me wrapping it. You know, like whatever was the love of Hashem brought up, and it was wrapping it and wrapping it and wrapping it, and then we had to come back out. I saw it where it was pushed down into the foundation, and then I came up like this, and it was just
Kind of like what
amazing.
Shelley was saying, though,
Yeah.
that you were like, okay,
But-
this is a bit incongruous with this, so we're just going to put it back where it belongs.
It just didn't stick very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Like glue that doesn't hold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, and I think we will get better at letting it stick, but I also think there is something very powerful about going there to that love and having it kind of inspire your day
I felt my
from
heart
here.
really
Yeah.
sort of get that flush of excitement when we were there.
Wow.
Did
When
you
we were
feel
deep?
it? Yes.
Yeah, it's like glowing, like, and
I
then
just felt
when we
it.
went back through the emotion, for me, it was like, oh, there's that thickness, that feeling,
Yeah.
and I'm just gonna sort of make it more like a sponge and just sort of, not a sponge, like a sieve, and I'm
Yeah.
just gonna go through it,
Oh, wow.
which was interesting because I thought, oh, that's a way to not get stuck.
Where you kind of diffuse your emotions
Yeah.
to allow the love to penetrate
Yeah.
and kind of
just move through
infuse
it.
them.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
So it was like a weight was lifted.
Wow.
Yeah, that was helpful, really helpful.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful.